watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
On May 4th, 1970, 6 days before my 25th birthday, one of the most tragic events in modern American history took place. 4 college students at a rally protesting America's general involvement in the Vietnam War, and more specifically, President Nixon's announcement that America had invaded Cambodia. 4 students were shot to death by Ohio National Guardsmen on the campus of Kent State University. In an instant, lasting but 13 seconds, the Guardsmen fired 67 rounds, hitting students in the protest, as well as those who were simply walking nearby or observing from a distance, taking the 4 lives, wounding 9 others, permanently paralyzing one of them. The 4 dead students were Allison Krauss and Jeffrey Miller, who had been participating in the protest. The other 2 were simply walking in the wrong place at the wrong time, from one class to another. They were Sandra Scheuer and William Knox Schroeder, and he was himself a member of the Kent University ROTC program. Of the 4 students killed by Guardsmen that day, the nearest was almost a football field away, and the average distance from the Guardsmen of all 4 of them was more than a football field away. It was incomprehensible that American boys in the National Guard in uniform, it was incomprehensible that they would be ordered to open fire with live and lethal ammunition against unarmed student protesters and on an American college campus. It was absolutely incomprehensible, unfathomable. And for countless Americans, and for me personally, life would never be the same again. Naivete died on the campus of Kent State on May 4th, 1970, as did a certain naive faith and belief in those who have decision-making power in government, even in the White House. And while I've never been a radical myself, though I certainly have always considered myself to be part of mainstream liberal Jewish thinking, I became a much more active, involved, aware American from that moment on. And on my desk, I have kept, since that horrific event in May 1970, kept on my desk at home a frame in which I pasted a photograph of the surviving Krauss family, Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Krauss, their younger 15-year-old daughter, Lori, pictured at the graveside ceremony for their 19-year-old beloved daughter, sister, Allison Krauss. Again, one of the 4 Kent State college students slain on the campus of Kent State. And as a Jew, I felt personally involved, for not only was Allison Krauss Jewish, 2 of the other slain students were also Jewish. 3 of the 4 Kent State students shot to death by Ohio National Guardsmen on May 4th, 1970, 3 of the 4 were Jews. And so I put in the frame, along with the picture of the Krause family. And I was in rabbinical school at the time. I put verses from Pirkei Avot. Which from that moment to this have been sort of the Jewish guides of my life. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor v'lo atav ben chorin lehibatel mimena. It is not your responsibility to complete the work, but neither are you free ever to desist from it. Al shlosha devarim ha'olam kayam al emet v'al hadin v'al ha'shalom. The world endures upon 3 principles: the principle of truth and justice and peace. And kol shemasav merubim mihachmato, hachmato matkayamet. For anyone whose deeds exceed his wisdom, then his wisdom will endure forever. At the very top of the picture of Arthur Krause, his wife to his left and his daughter Lori to his right. Ve'im lo achshav ematai. If not now, when? The event changed me, colored me, has driven me from May 4th, 1970 to this day. I don't know what you remember of that day in May. Or whether some of you now watching may be too young. You may not even have been born in 1970. But I know that many of you watching right now do remember Kent State and have your own personal memories and your own reactions to that black day in American history. And for one woman, the memory is seared into her consciousness, for she was in that student rally at Kent State on May 4th, 1970, and she was standing right next to the 4 students who were shot and killed that day. It is my privilege and honor to introduce you to Rita Rubin Long, who was a junior at Kent State that faithful day, remembers it all, and Rita is kind enough to join us to share some of her memories and her feelings with us. And Rita, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
First of all, as you hear me recount, and by the way, I noticed you teared.
Yep.
It's hard for you to hear it.
Well, I knew 3 of the students. I knew all the Jewish students. The one of them was at my house the night before.
Which one?
Jeff. And I went to his funeral in New York City. And I spoken for Sandy at Kent State and met her parents, and I knew Allison. So for me, it's my personal memory of what happened to me and the outrage of it, and the personal memory of, losing people that never got to live their lives.
Let me see how much of this I get right.
Okay. So far, you got it all right.
Okay. So it's April 30th, and President Nixon, who's president now during the Vietnam War that started in roughly 1965, may be a date that we use. From 1965 to 1975, the Vietnam War gripped this country and took the lives of more than 58,000 Americans. But on April 30th of 1970, President Nixon announces that the United States has entered Cambodia. And for many people who were against the war, and there was a major anti-Vietnam movement here in America, for those who were against the war, it looked like America had in fact ramped up the war by going into Cambodia. And there were student protests across the country.
Right.
Not only student protests, but student protests against the fact that America had now entered Cambodia. And then on May 1st, I believe it was, at Kent State, there was the first of actually there was another protest rally, I should say. And at that protest rally, students walked against the ROTC building. And there are some young people now, Rita, who don't realize that at one point on every American campus, on many American campuses, there were armed forces offices that recruited students, and students could become officers by joining the ROTC program. They would be students as well as training for the Army. Most of those offices are closed, although some are reopening now. But there was an ROTC office on Kent State's campus. And then there was an attempt to actually do harm to that building as a protest. And my understanding is you were a major force during that action on May 1st, 1970.
Me?
You personally?
No. No.
You did not take part in the actual...
Well, the thing started actually the Friday night before, and I had been off in Cleveland watching Woodstock. I drove back into town, and in the town, there were things that had happened, and people don't know actually if it was actual students or if it was even people that came to sort of mess things up. So that's one thing. But
We're talking about May 1st now?
This is the Friday night before the Monday. And the governor called in the National Guard. So I'm not sure they were there that night, but by the next day, I personally was at Nixon Hall, it was called, and I was watching a play. I came out of the play and I saw this building on fire.
You know, you're quoted.
In a book?
You're quoted as saying the following. In response to the burning of the ROTC building, this is, students cheered. I was glad it burned, Junior Rita Rubin said later. I'm against the war in Vietnam. I'm against anyone getting military training on college campus. We've been trying to end ROTC for a year, and burning down the building was a reasonable answer to an administration that doesn't listen to its students. Are you quoted accurately, Rita?
I have to check again. I know where that comes from because I was asked to write something. A friend asked me to write something that was put in a book called The Middle of the Country. And I know at the time I probably said, I'm glad that it burned.
In retrospect, are you?
No. You know. I think at the time, after all of this occurred, and my friends had been killed, and I felt that an invasion into Cambodia was wrong, I felt the war was wrong, I think at the time, in a lot of emotion, I could have said all of those things. I'm not sure, but I do have the book that it was written in, and so I could check to see if those were my words or a mixture of my words and somebody else's. But I did say that I was glad at the time.
And now you would say?
You know, that's not a way to get peace. And getting having the National Guard on the campus with their bayonets and their guns was absolutely wrong, and everything that happened after that was absolutely wrong. But I think I was myself when I went to the May 4th rally and stood there and said, you know, that I don't believe in this. And that's why I was standing there for two reasons at the time. One was
We're
because...
not talking about the Monday of the actual shooting.
Yes. On that day, the National Guard had been on campus for 3 days with big half-tracked, they had these things all over campus. They had their bayonets, they had their rifles. They had been there for 3 or 4 days. And so it was primarily to get them off the campus and to end the invasion from Cambodia. That's why I was there. But I was not your radical person who would go and burn down a building or do anything like that. But I think afterwards I looked back on it and said, you know,
well, you were angry.
Yeah.
You were very angry
well,
after that.
I was betrayed.
Well, I love that word. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there.
Yeah.
All right, take us to that. That's Friday, then Saturday, Sunday. On Friday, I understand,
Yeah.
a rally was scheduled for Monday. And the mayor at the time was Leroy Satrom. The governor was James Rhodes.
Yep.
And Satrom appealed to Rhodes. He was worried about, first of all, he was worried about violence in actually the town of Kent State. And he was worried about whatever. I mean, students, obviously, campus officials also were worried. And so the National Guard was requested by Satrom from Rhodes. Rhodes approved the National Guard coming down, and they were stationed both in the town and on the campus. Now Monday comes, and this is the day for the rally, sometime around noon. What do you remember about that day?
The day after the burning of the ROT Center, that was a Sunday, and I lived near campus. The National Guard came up my street, and I think that Jeff Miller came to try to distract them. He was a friend of mine. And I stayed on my corner. I watched that there were protests, down by the campus. The helicopter came, tear gassed us, tear gassed my cat. I stayed there. I didn't cross the street and go into the protests that were going on. But Alison Krauss was there.
This is Sunday
This is
or
on
Monday?
Sunday.
The day before.
And Alison Krauss was talking with one of the National Guard, and she actually put a flower into his gun, and that's why there's a quote from her that flowers are better than bullets. His officer did not like what he was doing and kind of gave this officer a hard time about it. This is what Sister Laurel says. So that day I kind of stayed home, and I just the next day I went out to go to school, and that's the Monday, taking you up to the Monday, May 4th.
You are a junior at Kent State.
Almost a senior.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
it's May.
It's May. It's May. And I intentionally wanted to go to the 12 o'clock rally. When I went to school at Kent State, I met people, and I started going to some meetings, the SDS, Students for a Democratic Society meetings, because a lot of my friends were involved in that. And I heard a different version of history that I had heard growing up as a cheerleader. And, I went to Woodstock, and I just thought about things.
When you say you went to Woodstock, had you literally gone to the Woodstock
Festival?
Yes. Okay, you were there.
So I went there, and
My brother was there.
Yeah?
My mother was there.
Wow.
My grandmother was there.
Whoa.
And my cousin was the producer.
So where were you?
I was in rabbinical school and had absolutely no interest in it.
Well, for me, it was...
I thought it was going to be just muddy and loud.
No, for me, it became a symbol of a community of peace.
Look, I missed one of the seminal moments
You did.
of the latter half of the 20th century America, and everybody in my family was there
Wow.
but me.
How unlucky.
But you were there.
I was there.
Were you dressed?
Was I dressed? Well, I went swimming in the lake for a little while, but I was dressed most of the time.
Okay.
Yes.
But to what extent, and you were a college junior, to what extent does that reflect your overall mentality at the time? In other words, if I had known you,
Right.
if we were contemporaries and I was at Kent State and you were there,
Right.
what were you like?
Well, I probably looked like a hippie with my hair all curled out. I was in education school, and I was a little different than some people in Ohio, so some of the professors thought my ideas were a little different. One professor got really mad at me because I said I would let children write sort of their invented spelling and put it up on the wall, and she just thought that was terrible. And they actually had a hearing after Kent State to see if I was moral enough to be a teacher before I could student teach. So
Because you were willing to let kids spell their way.
probably, and probably also because they probably found out somehow I was in the protests.
I see.
I mean, I was not a leader in the protest movement at all. I was just your regular, average school kid who was really starting to care about peace in the world, and who felt like, something is not right here. I'd like to just stand up and be counted to let people know that this isn't right.
And how Jewish were you?
Well, as Jewish as I am, you're always Jewish. I went to temple when I was a kid, And I loved it. And I remember having a lot of questions about, what is real? What is God? I would talk with my friends and say, like, well, did you find it? Did you find it? So, the normal questions, I think, to know what life could be like, to get to know what life is like, what is being Jewish. So I wasn't practicing at the time. I wasn't going to temple. I don't think there was a temple in Ohio, to tell you the truth. But, I was...
Did you have a Jewish identity? You knew you were Jewish?
Absolutely.
And it meant something to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. And among your friends, what percentage of them were Jewish?
Probably a lot.
A lot. We've said 3 of the 4 students who died that day were Jewish.
Yes.
Rita, is that simply coincidence, or does it reflect the fact that there was a strong Jewish presence within the protest movement? I recognize 2 were killed by accident, meaning they weren't part of the protesters. But do you remember, was the protest movement heavily populated by Jews?
There were a lot of Jewish students that were, learning about that, I'd say, yeah, even at Kent State.
How did you know Allison?
Well, I knew Allison and I knew Sandy, too, and Jeff. I knew Allison because we all were part of a large group that when I lived in a dorm, there was a place that we used to hang out. And there was a band called the James Gang, and Joe Walsh was in that band, and he used to play downtown in Kent, Ohio, and we used to go and listen to him. And I remember Allison and her boyfriend, Barry Levine, they would just gaze at each other with love. And they were just an obviously in love couple. And that really stood out to me. She was a freshman, but they were part of this large group of people. And I just always saw them, and we didn't hang out together, but I definitely knew them, and I definitely knew Barry.
Was Allison a rebel?
Allison, from what I've read about her from Laurel, had an intention that this was, that this war was wrong. She just seemed to me, from what I've seen now and what I saw then, to be, just like me, just somebody passionate about life and somebody living her life. And I think she was pretty intentional that she did not like the war.
Not liking the war doesn't make you a rebel.
She was not out there leading any of the marches, any of the movements at Kent State. I know the people who were, and I've kind of kept in touch with, this large group of people over 40 years, and she was not, one of the leaders. No.
What was her boyfriend's name?
Barry Levine.
Was he?
No.
They were just 2 Jewish kids at Kent State.
Yeah.
Who were against the war.
Yeah.
They were just 2 Jewish kids against the war, and they happened to be at Kent State.
Right.
Is it fair for me to say that I've just described the overwhelming number of kids who were in this protest?
Yes, I think there were some who also, were trying to lead some kind of a movement against it, and so they maybe had connections in some way. But mostly it was kids trying to say something was wrong.
With the war in Vietnam?
Right,
Okay.
and with the invasion of Cambodia.
Okay, so it's around noon on Monday, May 4th, 1970. Rita, what do you do?
I can't remember if I was in the class before or not, but I know that I arrived at this place that has something called the Victory Bell, and they used to ring it for football games. This is where the group gathered. And as we gathered, the National Guard was, I would say, maybe 50 feet away from us with a bullhorn, saying that we were under martial law and that we needed to leave and that we couldn't be there. And people said, no, that's not right. And so they kind of came, there were speakers, I think, and they came after us with tear gas. They were in a Jeep, and I don't know how many Jeeps were there, but I remember a Jeep with, a bullhorn saying, to leave. And so we were tear gassed, so we went, like if they were here, and we were here at the Victory Bell, there was a hill behind us. So we went up the hill. And I believe that I went into, there's an architectural building there. I believe that I went in there to wipe my eyes and to go to the bathroom to get some water. And then when I came out, there was, the National Guard was on the other side, and there was a fence. And they were behind a fence. And there were some people yelling at them. And then, I've seen so many pictures that I don't remember exactly when I see the turning of the guard and the kneeling. But a song that I wrote about it quite soon after that said they kneeled, they shot. So I know that that was part of my picture at the time. And I believe that I ran and took cover and then ran into a dorm.
When you're at the Victory Bell,
Right.
are you scared?
No.
It never occurs to you to be scared, does it?
No, I wasn't. I was just there to say how I felt. I was part of a group that was, probably reading some document against the invasion of Cambodia. So I felt like I have a right to be here and to say this. I had no idea of what would happen. I'm not the kind who stands up in the face of those kind of things and just says, yeah, and fights back. I was there, but I had no idea what would happen. None.
When I say that it was unfathomable to think that American guardsmen, young American kids, were going to shoot live bullets at college students, I say it was incomprehensible. Can you remember whether that's what you would have said that day at noon?
Oh, sure. You'd never heard of that before. Never heard about that before. And later that day, I walked past the guard. And the young ones, this is my memory, that young ones were crying, and some older ones were sort of laughing and jeering at me as I was trying to walk home.
Do you remember seeing them shoot?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's just images that I've seen. I remember hearing it. That I'm sure of. I remember hearing it, and I believe I ran for cover and just ducked down for a while, and then I just ran into the closest building I could find.
Gunfire stops. Do you ever come out?
I'm in a building, I'm in a dorm, and with big glass windows, and I hear a guy saying to me, oh, they should have shot them all, one of the students. And then another student, whose name is Robbie Stamps and has now passed away, was brought into that building, and he was somebody else that I knew, and he was shot in the behind. And they said, we'll get you a stretcher, and he said, no, there's people hurt out there much worse. And I never went out that front door again to go and to look and to see. And I know there were people who gathered. I left, I went out the back door, I went back to my old dorm and just sat there in shock. I met Mary Vecchio, who is in the famous picture with Jeff Miller, who was another friend of mine. She came into that building.
She came into the building?
She came into that building.
She had already been on the ground next to Jeffrey?
Yes.
And so after that moment, she came in and saw you?
She was in this group of people, and I remember her because I saw her picture later on. But she was just saying she was maybe going to California. She didn't know where she was going.
But wait, she was a 14-year-old runaway based on the way the reports came in. So she was not a Kent State student.
But I didn't know because she's just sitting there. She's just a person, a young person.
But as far as you know, that's true?
Yes.
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 Okay. And she wasn't in the protest?
I don't know. I don't know, her story. I know she's come back there to speak. It took her many, many years to come back and speak.
When do you really comprehend what has happened?
Later that day, I went back to my apartment, and as I said, I walked past the guard, and I went...
What time were we talking about?
I'm not really sure, I'm not really sure if it was 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, I don't really know, but I went home to try to call my parents, and I could not get through. And some of my friends, we were told we had to leave, and I don't know if this happened when I was if this happened when I was in the dorm. I know that I knew that day I had to leave. I had to gather my stuff Somebody from the London Times wanted to talk to me, and I just said, I have to go. I got in a car with some friends from New York, and as we're driving back, we start to hear the news reports.
Back where?
Back to New York. We had to leave. What
do you mean you had to leave?
We had to leave. The campus was closed. They just told us all to get out of town. So we left. We just got in a car and we left.
Did you pack your things?
I don't remember.
You just remember getting in a car somehow with friends?
With friends.
How many?
At least 3 other friends.
Boy and girl?
Yes.
All going back to New York?
Yep.
Any of them been in the protest rally?
Yep.
Do you remember talking? Do you remember what was said?
In the quote that you gave of me, there's another fellow named Bill, and he's also in that book. So I'm sure we were talking about it, but we were also, what I remember is this fog of listening to the radio. The first reports that we heard were that 4 National Guardsmen had been shot and killed. And we knew that wasn't true. And then as we listened, and we started to hear the names, and it was like out of a fog that I hear the name Jeffrey Miller, who was somebody who was at my house the night before. He would come over sometimes. He had transferred to Kent State the year before. He was a friend of people in my house. I knew him. So I hear his name. Sandy Scheuer was somebody, when I lived in a dorm, I first got to Kent State. My roommates went to some football game. They left me. I went in the elevator, and Sandy was in the elevator. She was also part of a group of friends. She said, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, you know," I told her what happened. She said, "Come with me." She took me to the football game. So I hear her name, and then I hear Allison's, and I just remember the fog of finding out, you know, the people who had died. That's my strongest memory of.
And do you remember feeling anything at that moment?
Well, you know, sad, very sad, you know, unbelievable that people I knew could be dead. Unbelievable. You know, later on, of the wounded people, I knew some of them as well, but just unbelievable and shocking. You know, that it all happened. Just shocking that, you know, that they had shot the students. Just shocking. For no reason.
This is the picture that's been on my desk since 1970. These are parents and a sister of a girl you knew.
I actually have been asked to go back to speak at Kent at different times on behalf of different people at the memorials they have on May 4th. And one of them may have been the 25th memorial, and I was asked to go back and speak on behalf of Sandy and just tell my little story. And I met her parents. I believe I met Allison's parents. They were in the audience. But since that time, I've met Laurel again, just on Facebook, because she's someone who's kind of carried the torch for her family at this time.
The sister.
The sister. So she and I have talked, and I wrote to her the first time to tell her that I knew her sister, that I have a sister that is about her age, about Laurel's age, and that I was really sad for her that she never got to have that relationship with her sister for, you know, for all these years. And so she and I have a special bond with each other. And she has started something called the Kent State Truth Tribunal, where she and the Kunstler sisters have filmed interviews from living witnesses and her mother and herself and many living witnesses at Kent State. They did this on the 40th memorial. I wasn't able to be there last year for the interview, so this kind of feels like my interview.
I'm very glad.
Yeah.
When you think of the event, put it in now perspective in terms of what it says about America, about life, what you felt then, what you feel now.
Well, as I look back, it felt like a betrayal to me as an American student who was going to school, you know, somebody who was a cheerleader, loved America, just got into, wanting peace in the world, and to find out that when we said what we felt, that other young Americans who had been on maybe a trucker strike and weren't even in Vietnam, because who knows if they were trying to get out of the war, that we were put together, and that somebody, I would think, gave the order to shoot. And there are tapes now that people are trying to look into that say there was an order to shoot. So there was a betrayal of me and my life, trying to say to my government in America, which is a place where you can talk about how you feel, trying to say this is wrong. And for someone to, it felt like they were trying to just shut down student protest all over the United States. And here's an example. We'll make an example of you, and this will do it. And it felt like that to me. I still had this quest for peace in my life. That never ended. It never ended to want people to be able to live in peace together in this world. And so everything I've done since then has had something to do with peace. I work with children, but in my own life, I've found access to inner peace, which made me really understand the Jewish religion, really understand that there is a connection to God. And, so that quest for peace, just still stayed strong in me for my whole life. And I was able, through feeling peace and feeling that kind of love, to get off of the idea that I was betrayed. You know what I mean? That happened, this whole thing happened, but life is about being alive and experiencing the beauty in life and the ups and downs and everything, and not to get stuck, not to forget, but not to get stuck in feeling angry or upset or sad, to remember to try to live life in a good way, to know that, that these people are not here and other people around the world, and that to try to make the most I can of my life and to help with the effort for peace in the world.
You heard me say that in some way for me, naivete died that day.
Yep.
And while I tend to be patriotic,
Yep.
I am patriotic in a different way, meaning there is no more blind trust.
Right.
And I am skeptical, and I have a much more, what I believe is a realistic sense of the limitations of human beings when they achieve public office, and how the old saying that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I'm wondering whether, when you hear me say naivete died on that day, whether any of that reflects what you felt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I really had a lot of trouble trusting the government for a long time. I didn't teach in the public schools for a long time. I taught in daycare centers. And finally someone said to me, "Come on back, Rita, we're ready for you now." But, I didn't have good feelings about that. I didn't really participate in politics very much at all. I went off and lived in Vermont and built a house in the middle of 100 acres for a while, but I did feel like that naivety kind of died in me too, definitely.
You were a junior. Did you go back for your senior year?
Because I transferred into Kent State, what I had left pretty much was my student teaching. So I went back the next year.
What was it like there?
Well, there's some pictures of me that my friends have showed me recently, and you could see in our faces what had happened. You could see. I mean, we still, people played a lot of music, and but there was just this, shock of what had happened. And I look at the pictures now, and I can see that it wasn't just the happy-go-lucky kids anymore. Something had happened, very big. For me, I had to have a hearing to see if I was moral enough to be a student teacher. They let me do that. The supervisor was very pleased that I had done so well. She found me a guy whose son was a hippie, and he took me out to a bar and bought me a glass of wine and said, hey, they told me a wild woman was coming. You know, but it was me. I did very well in my student teaching. I graduated. I left there in March. I never went back for 20 years until I could go to the first memorial.
Do you think the fact that you did not go back until the first memorial says something? It wasn't just coincidence.
Oh, no.
It was because you didn't want to go back.
Every May 4th, got flowers. I went to the ocean. I said the names of the people who died. I remembered them. I gathered with other people. I had been betrayed by the university, and I could not believe they didn't do anything about it. They tried to cover it over for a while. They had the name Kent with State very small on their logo. They tried to cover it over. The parents, I believe, and the B'nai B'rith put up a memorial stone that has the students' names on it. That was the only memorial for a very long time. And we went back with black armbands. And the first memorial they put up didn't even have names on it. They planted 57,000 tulips, daffodils, for the people who had died in Vietnam, and not much at all for the students at Kent. And so I went back finally, again, I guess, to say, you know what, this isn't right. You should do something about this. But it took me a long time because it was a big trauma for me. I remember on that day, it was always a day that I memorialized, definitely.
Did anyone ever say they were sorry?
Not really. Not really. I know there was a trial, and I know there was some money given, and the parents accepted the money for Doug Vaughn, who was the student who was paralyzed, so that he would have some money in his life. But they didn't really say they were sorry.
Shouldn't the administration have said something to you guys?
A lot of people should have said something to us. Yes.
Shouldn't the governor have said something? Shouldn't the mayor have said something? Shouldn't whoever was in charge of the National Guard? But when you read the story, there's a sergeant who's mentioned, and Sergeant Taylor. It's unclear when you read the story whether, in fact, National Guardsmen were just, I don't want to say confused, but there's a question as to whether there ever was a literal order to fire. To this day, it's not clear. But what is clear to me is that the people in charge didn't make sure that nobody fired. There was nobody saying to these kids, hold on, hold on, hold on. By the way, no one was attacking anybody.
No. They might have they might have used some gravel from the parking lot.
Okay.
How far away? They were so far away.
They were a foot. By the way, somebody should go into an end zone on a football field and try to throw a rock, a pebble, anything, from one end of the field to another. Try to throw a football 100 yards. So that it doesn't seem to me like any National Guardsman was in any kind of immediate danger when the shots were fired. And it's interesting, my understanding is that the inquiry, the report, and certain reports were done not necessarily at Kent State, but the whole campus unrest period. And the statements that were made were, to my understanding, number one, the National Guard was not violating the students' rights when they were told to tell the students to stop the assembly. That bothers me constitutionally as an American, because in theory, you understand, if the students were there to do either harm to property or harm to other human beings, then the government has a right to break that assembly up. But if at the moment the assembly was doing neither one of them, it seems to me the government had no right to tell students that they did not have a right to assemble. But what was said was that it was inexcusable that the National Guard had live fire in their rifles, and that at any point live ammunition was fired at students. Inexcusable.
Right.
But I wanted somebody to say to you,
It was wrong.
it was wrong and we're sorry.
And we're sorry.
We're really sorry. And, you know,
I think Arthur Krauss wanted that too.
by the way, this picture has stayed on my desk. I was only, 1970, I was 25. I was born in 45. But I identify with the father, not with the sister. I identify with the father. To this day, I identify with the father. How do you lose a daughter? My daughter was not yet born. She would be born 2 years later. And maybe I saw my father. What if my father had lost me or my brother on a college campus because National Guardsmen had fired at us? Even as I say it to you, Rita, it's not, I don't believe it, except that it happened. I don't believe it. And so the pain I see on this father's face, to me, is emblematic of the pain of every parent who lost a child or a child who was injured, or for you, and the pain that you felt losing friends. And okay, so you ducked into a building, you were smart enough to stay out of harm's way for that moment. But you had to feel an identification with these people.
Yeah, it could have been me. I wrote a few songs, and one song was "You'll Never Get Us All." So it was really, there was identification. Also, at the memorials at Kent State, they remember Jackson State because later, again, they shot students on a campus in Jackson, Mississippi, but it's not talked about too much. So
Remind me about that event.
All I know is I had a good friend who used to come and speak, and I met him at Kent State, and he came and spoke on behalf of the students that were killed on the Jackson, Mississippi campus. I think it could have been within that year. I'm not really sure of the timeline, but it was very close. And so when they have the memorials at Kent State, they also have them for Jackson State because nobody remembered the black kids that were killed. Nobody remembered them. Nobody ever said they were sorry either. When I went back to speak about Sandy, there's a midnight march. There's a midnight vigil. Like about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, you walk with 4 Yutzite candles, and you lead a march through the campus, and then you end up at the places where they were killed. And they used to just cordon them off on those days, but recently they've put things there in the parking lot still. They kind of built buildings over where a lot of things happen, but people stand there all night long with Yutzite candles in memory of the 4 students who died and put rocks on. And so the times I've gone back there, I've been on those marches. We end up at the B'nai B'rith, the stone for them. We sing, we remember them. Their brothers and sisters come, parents come who can, and remember what happened there.
It sounds like a heart-wrenching experience.
It's heart-wrenching, but there's something good about it. Like after 20 years when I went back, I went with my husband and I felt a healing happen in me. I did. Because, I don't know, I was there, I was back in that spot again, I was remembering with people, I was memorializing. It was almost like saying the Kaddish or something, but something happened in me that after that, I could talk about it without all the trauma that I used to feel.
Did you ever hate the Guardsmen?
Sure, I'm sure I did. But now I can walk past, like sometimes I walk on a boulevard where I live in Portland, Maine, and I see that sometimes there's some troops and they walk by and they're training. I look at them and I see in them, they are human beings, that they're doing the best they can for their country. They really care about it. I think sometimes leaders make really bad decisions, and I think some really bad decisions were made. And I would hope that people could take a look at that and change some of that, but I don't. They were in a situation. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know what their life was like. So I don't hate them, but for a while I was, like, I wouldn't go into the National Guard myself. I wouldn't choose that kind of a life. But I see them as human beings.
And you personally have moved on.
Yeah, I remember, but I've moved on. But I never forget. And when I get an opportunity to think about it, I can see how important it has been in my life. It's a story. I mean, that every year I remember. Every year. It was so wrong, but it was, I lived it. So I remember. I guess I've moved on in a way to be able to enjoy life. I haven't been stuck in somebody, who was in a tragedy like that.
Rita, you're a very special woman. You're a very special human being. It sounds like in some ways, especially when you went back for that 20th reunion,
Mm-hmm.
you have transcended the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it doesn't live in you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to conclude just by saying to me, for you personally, and for all of us listening to your story now, if there is one thing you take away, if there's one thing you want us to take away, in terms of something positive out of a moment that was just, as I say, black, horrific mark on what is very often an extraordinarily gorgeous American scenario, what would you have us take away from this?
I think what I've taken away is that peace is within each person. And you need to find that so that you can live your life through all the ups and downs, through black moments, through everything. And that still work to make things better. Do it as you feel comfortable. Maybe go out of your comfort zone. I don't know. It's up to each person how much they go out of their comfort zone. But life is a precious thing. It's what we're given. And it comes and goes. And while we're here, to enjoy life. I mean, the last time I went to Kent and I wrote something, it said from blank you to thank you. There's the thank you in me for being alive. There's a thank you for knowing the beauty of life and for knowing that other people didn't get to experience it, but that I can. I always have that wish to enjoy life and to help make things good for whoever I'm around. And we still have our country where you can work on things, even though I don't usually choose that path because I think that betrayal kind of sent me like, okay, I don't think it's through politics that I'm going to be doing this. But as a teacher, as a friend, as a human being, I think that you can make your world a little better. And I think just having that quest for peace is something that light has to stay lit.
Kent State didn't make you bitter.
Well, it made me bitter to know that what happened, and to know that students were shot at, and to know that people were killed, and to know that people were trying to end when people say we don't want something, this is not right, war is not right. Yeah, it made me bitter, but I'll tell you, I looked for the sweetness in life because I'm alive. And I would think of those people and think they're not here, and I am. And that quest for peace in me was very strong and stayed strong.
What does it mean to you that I keep this picture on my desk?
When I heard that, I was in awe, in a way. It was like, how could somebody that I've met in my life before have that on his desk? I wanted to know more. You know what I mean? I wanted to know your story. Why did it affect you? And so today when you talked about that, that was really important to me because I never knew there were other people that were, how other people were affected. People say, oh, I remember that day and stuff, but I never talked to somebody I knew who kept a picture from that day, and to see how much it meant, and has influenced your life. And I hope to connect you with Laurel if you would like to meet her. I don't know how she'd feel about that, but
Mention her.
I
Meet
will.
her.
I will.
You're an extraordinary human being, and it's so kind of you to share this story with us. And I hope you always know the inner peace you've talked about, and you have transcended in a beautiful way, and you are very, very special. Thank you so much. Come here. Love you.
Thank you. It was a Monday, just like today, about a second ago. It still happens again every day, just like it happened on that day. The victory bell was chiming loud, calling the people to meet. Suddenly, the tear gas was in our eyes. They knelt and they shot, and there on the ground our friends lie. And they're dead, my country, 'tis of thee.
Love you.
Yep. Still in there, huh? Woo! Yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
Yep. That was it.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.